Part 1 expanded approximately 700 words. Elara had felt unwanted before, but never like this, never with the sun beating down on her face while strangers haggled over her like she was a mule with a limp. The heat shimmered off the dry earth, turning everything into a wavering mirage, but the truth of what was happening cut through clearer than any sharp blade. She stood beside the chestnut mare, a beautiful, glossy creature whose only mistake was being worth exactly what her former guardian wanted in exchange. The mare snorted, restless, as if sensing the wrongness of it all. Elara wished she could be that horse instead, valued, admired, spoken about with respect. The man who traded her away spat into the dust and swung onto his saddle without even meeting her eyes. His indifference stung more than cruelty ever had. At least cruelty meant you were noticed. This was something colder, something that said she was nothing, just a body to be rid of. Elara clenched her hands behind her back so no one would see them shake. She refused to let tears fall. Where she came from, tears were a luxury, the kind that invited more trouble. You learned to swallow them like bitter medicine and keep your chin up, even if the world tried to shove it down. The cowboy who now owned her, or so she believed, sat still atop his bay horse, watching the rancher ride away. He didn't speak, not yet, and that silence wrapped around her like a tightening rope. Men who were quiet usually had something dangerous simmering beneath the surface. It made her heart thump unevenly in her chest. When he finally dismounted, the crunch of his boots on the gravel sounded louder than it should have. He was tall, built like someone who worked with his hands and didn't mind the strain. His skin was bronzed by the sun, his jaw shadowed with dark stubble, and his eyes, she couldn't read his eyes. They weren't greedy, they weren't cruel, they were simply observing her, steady and unreadable. Elara straightened her spine instinctively. Whatever came next, she would face it the same way she had faced everything else, silent, strong, refusing to break in front of any man. But the cowboy surprised her. He didn't circle her, didn't reach for her, didn't smirk or make a joke or offer a command. Instead, he studied her the way a man might look at a wounded hawk, something dangerous but cornered, proud but hurt. "I think there's been a mistake," he said at last. She flinched at the sound of his voice, deep and warm, like the low rumble of thunder before a summer storm. But there was no threat in it. Just calm, steady calm. "A mistake," she echoed, her voice dry as dust. He nodded once, slow. "I don't own people." The words hit her harder than a slap. Men always claimed that, right before proving the opposite. The cowboy saw her skepticism. His gaze softened. "I paid for your freedom," he said, "not for you." Elara blinked. She almost laughed, bitterly, sharply, because freedom was a word men liked to toss around while locking doors behind them. But something told her he wasn't lying. Something about his voice, the way he kept his hands visible and far from her, the way he stood a careful distance away as though approaching too close might spook her. "Why?" she demanded. The words scraped out raw, and she hated that it betrayed how badly she needed an answer. Part 2 expanded approximately 700 words. Colt Maddox didn't push her to speak, and that was the first thing that unsettled Elara. Men always pushed, questions, commands, expectations, but Colt moved through the world as though patience was as natural as breathing. She wasn't sure what to make of it. He guided her toward the shade of a cottonwood tree near his wagon, keeping several respectful paces between them. "Water's in the canteen," he said, nodding toward it. "Take what you need." Elara hesitated. Nothing came without a price. Water, kindness, a soft tone, everything had strings. But her throat burned like she'd swallowed gravel, and the canteen gleamed with promise. She snatched it quickly, as if expecting him to change his mind, and drank until her hands stopped shaking. Colt didn't comment. He just checked the cinch on the chestnut mare, his movements slow, methodical, gentle, even. Elara found herself watching him, confused by a man who treated a horse with more respect than most men gave their wives. "You can ride in the back of the wagon if you're tired," he said. She stiffened. "I'm fine." He nodded as though that was the only answer he expected. The Broken Arrow Ranch lay several miles ahead, tucked between rolling hills and a creek that glimmered in the late afternoon sun. The land stretched wide and open, a place that looked too peaceful to belong to the world she knew. They rode in silence, Colt on his bay, Elara on foot for the first mile, refusing to accept a kindness she didn't trust. Eventually her legs gave out, and Colt, without a word, offered her the mare. "Her name's Juniper," he said as she climbed up awkwardly. "She likes to be spoken to." Elara swallowed. No one had ever told her a horse liked being spoken to. She cleared her throat and murmured a soft greeting. Juniper flicked an ear back, as if listening. Colt smiled. Not a smirk, not a knowing grin, just a small, genuine curve of his mouth. She likes you. The warmth that bloomed in Elara's chest startled her. She killed it quickly. When they reached the ranch, the sun was low, painting the sky in gold and copper. The place wasn't fancy, just a weathered barn, a small house, and fencing that looked like it was repaired often and hastily. But something about it felt gentle. Lived in, safe, though she refused to admit it. Colt fed the horses first, murmuring softly as he worked. Elara hovered uncertainly near the barn door, feeling like an intruder in someone else's quiet world. Eventually, she stepped forward. You run this place alone? She asked. Most days, he said. Got help during cattle season. And now you have me, she said bitterly. Colt straightened, dusting off his hands. No, I didn't bring you here to work off a debt. Then why bring me at all? Because you weren't safe where you were. Elara hated how much that struck her. She looked away quickly, studying the boards of the barn so he wouldn't see the flicker of fear, or gratitude, in her eyes. That evening, he set a pot of beans to simmer over a small fire pit outside. The scent drifted up, warm and comforting in a way that felt foreign. He didn't make her sit beside him, he simply nudged a tin plate toward her and kept his eyes on the flames. Only after she had eaten half did she realize he hadn't touched his own portion yet. You should eat, she muttered. I will, he said softly. Wanted to make sure you weren't hungry anymore. Her chest tightened again. Kindness wasn't supposed to feel like this, like something fragile and dangerous all at once. As the stars blinked awake across the darkening sky, she finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had gnawed at her since morning. Days on the Broken Arrow Ranch passed in a rhythm that felt both foreign and grounding. The sun rose early, spilling gold across the hills, and Colt was always already awake, already working. He didn't bark orders or hover, but the land moved with him as if it knew its caretaker well. Elara followed his quiet example, learning how to mend a fence post, how to check a horse's hooves for cracks, how to read the clouds for rain. She discovered that the world could be both unforgiving and gentle, sometimes in the same breath. At first, she kept her distance. She didn't trust this man who had appeared like a ghost at the edge of her life. Trust had been ripped away too many times before. But Colt never pushed, never pressed for words or promises. He simply worked alongside her, letting silence fill the spaces where conversation might have seemed awkward or dangerous. The horses responded to his calm, Juniper leaning into his hand as if she had always belonged there, and, slowly, Elara began to wonder if maybe some beings could be trusted, if only a little. By the end of the first week, she caught herself laughing at something small, a rooster's absurdly loud crow, a chicken that darted under her boots, and immediately stopped, embarrassed. She wasn't used to letting herself feel anything beyond survival. Colt noticed, of course. He didn't comment, he never did. But that quiet acknowledgement, the way his eyes softened for a fraction of a second, made her heart both ache and swell. One afternoon, while fixing a sagging fence along the creek, she finally asked, "Why do you do this? Why help people you don't know?" Colt wiped his brow and leaned on the post, eyes following the water as it rippled over stones. Because someone had to, he said simply. Because the world's easier to bear if you make it a little better, even for strangers. She wanted to scoff, wanted to call it naive, but his words weren't arrogant. There was no performance in them, no hidden agenda. He meant it, and the truth of it rattled something deep inside her. As the weeks passed, her hands grew calloused, her muscles firmed from work she hadn't known she was capable of. She learned to ride Juniper confidently, to anticipate the mare's moods, to coax her along stubborn paths. Colt watched, always nearby but never hovering, letting her find her own balance. Then the storm came. It started as a distant rumble, a warning, but within minutes the sky tore open, sending sheets of rain pounding across the ranch. Lightning split the horizon, jagged and terrifying. The wind whipped, tugging at fence posts and loose boards. Elara and Colt had been checking the horses, securing gates and tying down the loose feed barrels when Juniper, startled by a sudden strike of lightning, bolted. "Juniper!" Elara shouted, her voice lost in the roar of the storm. She sprinted after her, mud sucking at her boots, rain blinding her eyes. The mare bolted toward a ridge, and Elara, refusing to let her go, tripped, sliding dangerously close to the edge. Her heart slammed in her chest as the ground beneath her threatened to give way. Then a strong hand grabbed her arm, yanking her back with a force that was firm but careful. She looked up into Colt's face, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, eyes wide with urgency. "I've got you," he shouted over the storm. His voice carried the kind of certainty that made her bones stop shaking long enough to realize she was safe. When the storm passed, they stood in silence, Juniper finally calm beside them, the earth dripping around their boots. Elara's chest heaved, not from the run but from the realization that this man, this stranger, had risked himself without hesitation. "You matter," Colt said softly, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. "Not because I saved you. Not because anyone told me to. You matter because you're human. You're free. You're stronger than the world has ever let you believe." Elara swallowed, tears slipping despite her stubbornness, and for the first time in her life, she didn't look away. She didn't shrink from kindness. She didn't fear freedom.